Marcus Garvey told Jamaicans over 100 years ago, don't beg for a job, build your own business. Don't ask for a seat at their table, build your own table. Don't accept their economy, create your own. Simple, direct, clear. But Jamaicans didn't listen. They called him too radical, too ambitious, a dreamer who wanted too much. And now look, a century later, look at Jamaica. Still economically dependent, still building other people's wealth, still waiting for economic freedom that will never come from working in systems designed to keep you poor. Marcus Garvey gave you the blueprint. You just refuse to follow it. Today, we're talking about what Jamaicans lost when they ignored Marcus Garvey and what you need to reclaim right now. So let me tell you what Marcus Garvey actually did, not just what he said. In 1914, Marcus Garvey founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association in Jamaica. What was the mission? Economic self-sufficiency, political empowerment, cultural pride. By the 1920s, the UNIA had millions of members worldwide, not just talking about liberation, building it. Marcus Garvey created the Black Star Line, a ship company owned by Black people, employing Black people, serving Black communities. He understood if you don't control transportation, you don't control trade. If you don't control trade, you don't control wealth. He built Negro Factory Corporation, businesses owned and operated by Black people, grocery stores, restaurants, laundries, printing presses, creating jobs, circulating wealth within the community instead of extracting it out. Then there was the newspaper. The Negro World reached 200,000 readers weekly across the globe. He understood if you don't control the narrative, someone else will control how you see yourself. There was the vision for Liberia, a plan to establish economic zones where Black people could build independent economies free from colonial exploitation. This wasn't theory, this was action. Marcus Garvey was building an economic empire for Black people globally with Jamaica at the heart. He told Jamaicans, you will never be respected until you have economic power. Political rights mean nothing if you're economically enslaved. He understood what Jamaicans still don't understand. The system will never give you economic freedom. You have to build it yourself. So why didn't Jamaicans follow Marcus Garvey? Why did they reject the man who gave them the clearest path to economic liberation? Because his vision required work. Building your own business is harder than getting a job. Creating your own economy is harder than participating in theirs. Economic independence requires sacrifice. It requires vision and patience. And Jamaicans wanted the easy path. They wanted colonial system to just treat them better. They wanted jobs with fair wages instead of ownership. They wanted inclusion instead of independence. They rejected his vision because his vision required unity. Marcus Garvey's plan only worked if Jamaicans supported each other, if they bought from Black businesses, if they invested in Black enterprises, if they circulated wealth within their own community. But Jamaicans were already programmed to compete, not collaborate, to tear each other down instead of build each other up, to trust foreign businesses more than their own people's businesses. They rejected him because the system destroyed him. They imprisoned Marcus Garvey on trumped up charges. They deported him. They dismantled organizations. They made him an example. This is what happens when you try to build economic power outside our control. And as Jamaicans learned the lesson, They saw what happened to Garvey and thought, oh, it's safer to just work with them. Building our own is too dangerous. They rejected him because they didn't believe it was possible. Marcus Garvey's vision was too big for people who had been conditioned to think small. I mean, a global Black economy, Black owned shipping lines, independent Black nations. It sounded impossible. So what they did, they rejected it, called him a dreamer, and went back to begging for scraps from the system that enslaved them. Now, let me show you what Jamaicans lost by ignoring Marcus Garvey. They lost ownership. Jamaicans don't own their resources. They don't own their businesses at scale. They don't own their economy. They work for multinational corporations, buy from foreign businesses. The money leaves Jamaica the moment it's earned. If Jamaicans had followed Garvey, they'd have generational businesses, Jamaican owned corporations, wealth that stays in Jamaica and builds more wealth. Instead, you're employees, not owners. And employees will never be wealthy. You lost economic power. Without ownership, you have no leverage. You can't negotiate, you can't demand, you can't create opportunities for your own people. You're dependent on foreign investment, dependent on tourism, dependent on remittances, dependent on systems that can abandon Jamaica the moment it's no longer profitable. If Jamaicans had followed Garvey, they'd be self sufficient. The economy wouldn't collapse when tourism didn't come. They'd feed themselves, employ themselves, sustain themselves. Now they've lost generational wealth. Marcus Garvey was building empires that would pass down through generations, businesses that would employ grandchildren, wealth that would compound over decades. But Jamaicans choose jobs instead of businesses, and jobs don't pass down. When you die, your children start from zero. That's why every generation of Jamaicans struggles because nobody's building, they're just working. And work creates income, but ownership creates wealth. You lost your dignity. There's a difference between working for someone and working for yourself, between building someone else's dream and building your own. Marcus Garvey wanted Jamaicans to have the dignity of ownership, of independence, of self determination, but instead, they settled for indignity of employment, of waiting for someone else to give permission to survive, of being grateful for exploitation. So, how? How do Jamaicans reclaim what Marcus Garvey tried to give them? You got to build businesses, not just careers. Stop making your life goal to get a job, a good job. Jobs are fine for survival, but wealth comes from ownership. Start businesses, even small ones, even side hustles, even something you do on weekends. Because every business you build, it's a step toward economic independence. And support Jamaican businesses. Buy from each other, invest in each other, circulate wealth within Jamaica instead of sending it out. You need to create cooperative economies. You don't have to build alone. And Marcus Garvey understood collective power. Pool resources, start cooperatives, create community businesses where multiple families own shares, build together what you can't build individually. This is how you create the Black Star Line of today. Not one Jamaican building something alone, but Jamaicans together building something powerful. You need to teach your children differently. Stop raising employees and raise owners, raise builders, raise creators. Teach your children entrepreneurship, not just how to fill out job applications. Teach them how to create opportunities, not just wait for them. Teach them to think like Marcus Garvey, like people who build empires, not just work in them. You need to reconnect with the land. And Garvey understood that economic power starts with controlling your resources. And Jamaica's greatest resource is the land. Grow your food, own property. Stop depending on imports for things you can produce yourself. Economic sovereignty starts with being able to feed yourself without depending on foreign systems. Invest in Jamaica, not just in yourself. Stop thinking individually and start thinking collectively. When you make money, reinvest it in Jamaica, in Jamaican businesses, in Jamaican land, in Jamaican communities. Because wealth that leaves Jamaica makes someone else wealthy. But wealth that stays in Jamaica and circulates makes everyone wealthy. This is what Marcus Garvey understood. Economic liberation is collective, it's not individual. You can't be the only wealthy Jamaican in a poor Jamaica and call that success. Marcus Garvey gave Jamaicans the blueprint over 100 years ago. Build your own your own, create your own, control your own. Not as a dream, as a necessity. Because without economic power, every other kind of freedom is an illusion. You can have political rights and still be economically enslaved. You can have cultural rights and still be economically dependent. You can have education and still be economically exploited. Real freedom is economic, and economic freedom comes from ownership, not employment. Stop waiting for the system to give you what it will never give. Stop working your entire life building other people's wealth. Start building, start owning, start creating. That's how you honor Marcus Garvey. That's how you honor the vision he tried to give you. Not by talking about him once a year, by becoming what he tried to make you economically free.